No beer here. That's why
Kind easier over here.
for Justin to get back in steer.
Triangle you
So it's like
Okay.
store everything.
It likes to hang out at like 2% on them, like 10 out there.
Oh wait, no, that's
We're just waiting for Justin to come back, I guess.
This is like
Wait, do or don't? Oh, okay.
No, he's got visa troubles. He like can't work in the U.S. right now until
Really?
until it's like it's like going through process.
That's a bummer.
So
He's even
he's
even married to an American.
we want him to work with him. We just can't get it.
yeah, I mean, he
send him some example code to have him read through and try to
hopefully
decipher.
within the next like 3 weeks.
So like have them work for us and just keep track of those hours and then cut them a big check.
I feel like there's something like fraud.
Pay him in your
Chayun Kim.
All right, so we're gonna get started here. Today's engineering meeting, you get just me. There are 2 slots, and I stole both of them. So hopefully I won't take too much time, but I do want to leave time for questions because this is an important update for our clients, and it will become important as analysts and other people start taking this data and using it. Basically I want to start off with what is OES. OES is the Occupational Employment Statistics from the BLS, which there's a lot of text up here. I'll let you read it if you want to. But basically, it's our source for occupation data. They define our occupation dimension, so which occupations we have available to clients. They also define how granular our geographies can be for staffing patterns. So they publish two products that we use. One is a national staffing pattern, and one is regional occupation data, which goes down to the MSA level. And we combine those two into one to create regional staffing patterns. And so that's why their geography, the MSA level data, is what defines our staffing pattern regions. Is the we just don't have any data below that level. So staffing, all of our staffing data, you can get it at the county level and zip level from Magnedio, but it's just copying it down from the staffing pattern area. Their data is based on 3 years, or each year of OES data. So each release is based on 3 years of data, 6 panels of surveys. So this is not administrative records data. It's not census data. It's survey data, so it's less reliable, but they pick a wide time frame so that it's more stable and reliable. They adjust wages forward to, so if you're looking at 2017 OES, it will be in terms of 2017 dollars. And they also benchmark to QCW. So the industry employment and total occupation employment are benchmarked to published QCW data. The project that we embarked on a while ago, I'll get to how long ago that was in a bit, was to really 2 things that break down these 4 goals. Increase the accuracy of our staffing patterns, and then also provide historical occupation earnings. In order to do that, we had to overcome all the challenges that come along with a non-time series data set. So OES publishes 1 year of data, and then they publish another year, and they say, don't use the old one. And it's kind of like our data runs, right? We tell people not to compare data runs, they tell people not to compare OES releases. The difference is that we publish a time series every time. They just publish 1 year of data each time. So we took on the project of actually creating the time series out of OES data, and we did get permission to do this. We actually called them up on the phone. I think Justin, wherever he is, hey, there he is. Justin got the verbal okay from the guys at OES that if anybody can do this, OES probably has the chops to create a time series out of or MZ. Right. Anybody can, and OES can. Now MZ could create a time series out of OES data. They thought that we could do that. So based on that and on the specific challenges that they laid out, we decided to go ahead and try to do this. It also, so we also integrated other data that we've had laying around but haven't been using. This allowed us to integrate that data. So historical wages from ACS as well. The specific limitations that OES laid out were these, and they say the Bureau of Labor, this is from their website, the Bureau of Labor Statistics at present does not use or encourage the use of OES data for time series analysis. Where users choose to make such comparisons, we would caution them to note the changes in survey procedures, etc. So these are the ones that they lay out on their website, and I'll just go through them briefly. The classification changes, we deal with this all the time. We do the same thing for QCW, ACS, basically every data set that isn't published all in one file. We have to make the different classifications mesh with one another. We usually standardize them to the latest classifications. So that's something we do all the time. They also instituted some changes in the 2002 OES release. They really beefed up their game basically in 2002. But because OES is a 3-year time series, or is a combination of 3 years of data, the pre-2002 methodology lasted through 2004. So 2004 was made up of partially 2001 through 2004. So we begin our time series at 2005, and that takes care of both those next limitations. Another thing that they say is changes appear slowly in the data because it is an average of 3 years. This ends up being an advantage because it makes the data pretty stable. We have another, well, I guess the way we mitigate that is we actually don't use OES data as is. We turn it into percentage staffing patterns and apply industry data to it in order to create occupation data, which means that industry data, which is very responsive to the economy, is actually driving the changes in the data, not OES itself. OES just provides the stable staffing pattern to do that. They also have all kinds of special notices and documented definitional changes in different years. Because they're not concerned about creating a time series, they just don't really care. They're like, we changed this time. So we have to deal with all those. They also change like the order of occupations listed on the survey. So when an employer gets the survey, they have to like choose which occupation their workers are in, and they usually are going to pick the first one that looks reasonable. So if you change the order that they're in, your data can change drastically. The result of the survey can change drastically. So we have there are lots of fun things to deal with. They have this special notices page, which I had to go back to many times. But I just clicked an example of this. It's really hard to read, but basically they say, we made a mistake in 2007, we fixed it in 2009, but pre-2007 estimates were not fixed. So this is an example of another challenge. Because it's not a time series, they sometimes update old mistakes, they sometimes don't. Sometimes they just suppress an entire state. So the project, basically before and after picture of what we have had before and what we have now. We used to just publish current year earnings based on 2018, well, now it's 2018, but 2018 OES, latest year OES. And then we created regional staffing patterns basically based on the same thing, latest year OES. Now we have a historical time series of earnings from 2005 to 2018, and those regional staffing patterns are based off of a time series of OES data. It's back projected a little bit, so we basically get 2001 through 2018 data feeding into those historical regional staffing patterns. So staffing patterns are a lot more robust, and we basically have an entirely new data set in the occupational wages. This is what it took to do it. A lot of code, 18 months, and a lot of my time. There are other people that contributed that didn't really make it into the issues. Obviously, management spent a lot of time paving the way for the developers to work on it. Brian specifically works on our infrastructure that we build all this stuff off of. So there's a lot of work that he did that's not captured by the specific issues related to OES. And then Jared, wherever he is, hello. Jared was consulted many times as I went through this, because he was the original, well, he at least designed the latest, the previous unsuppression of OES that we've been using for years. So very helpful. As far as a timeline goes, we, on average, spent about 7 or 8 points per sprint over the last year and a half. The national staffing took just a couple of months at the beginning. The regional staffing and occupation earnings took over a year. And then at the end, we started pulling in the ACS for the self-employed earnings as well to get that wrapped up. We also released, if you look at the green box at the bottom, we released different aspects of this along the way. We were able to, basically a month after we finished the national staffing, integrate that into the data run, and then various improvements along the way. The bulk of the changes, though, are going to come in the 2019 3 data run. So that'll be the biggest change for clients will be this data run. The simplified workflow, we basically have processes that read in the raw data. Then we do what we call pre-unsuppression, which OES has this fun habit of suppressing some data and just leaving other data completely out. So they don't even, sometimes they tell you data's not there. Sometimes they don't tell you it's not there. So we have to figure that out, decide where there should be data, where data is most likely to appear. And then we also, before the unsuppression, try to figure out as many values as we can, mathematically or algebraically, so that the unsuppression can do a better job. For context, of the 10,000 lines of code, the unsuppression is, I think, 3,000 or 4,000. So the staffing pattern, national staffing pattern, regional occupation unsuppression, and then the occupation earnings process is a 2,000 line file, which is hard to reason about. And then this, you'll see lots of processes here in the blue representing the time series creation. Most of those are very simple and standard data team type things, making the dimensions consistent with the latest dimension, some smoothing, some back projecting, scaling things up and down. It's pretty standard stuff. After that, most of the work is done getting the data out of the raw format into our cubes, then unsuppressing and estimating earnings. If you go back to the timeline actually for a little bit, this, the national staffing and the regional occupation employment and earnings are really 2 different pipelines. So they actually got split into kind of 2 separate projects. The reason for that is national staffing is just industry and sector, so sectors ownership, like private, federal, state, local, and industry. by occupation, and at this point we just do employment. So it's a much simpler, smaller data set, and that's why it took less time. When you're looking at regional occupation data, you have a lot more work to do because, well, you may be wondering why there's 2 geography dimensions too. But we turned it into a 3-dimensional problem: state on one dimension, MSA on another, and occupation on another, because MSAs cross state boundaries. So you can't simply add up all the MSAs in a state and get the state total, because that will include data from outside the state. So we actually have to distinguish, we have to put them on different dimensional angles, and that allows us, it allows us to aggregate the data up, but it also allows us to distinguish between like the Oregon portion of the Portland MSA and the Washington portion of the Portland MSA. It allows us to create estimates for both, which are important for our staffing patterns. But then you also have, in addition to employment, you have average earnings and percentile earnings. Average earnings are nice because they aggregate when weighted by employment. Percentile earnings don't in any way, but they do have a relationship to average earnings, so we leverage that. As far as retrospective look on how things went, there were a lot of successes along the way. We did accomplish our goal. There was an initial research and planning step that we did at the very beginning. We basically sat down and said, let's do this the right way and learn as much as we can about OES. That was one of the most valuable things that we did, because we learned so much at the beginning. We could plan it out really well, rather than like creating it, you know, by the end we were working on an issue, then at the end of that week creating another issue for the next sprint, then at the end of that week creating another issue for the next sprint. Basically, we didn't know what we were going to be doing the next week until we had finished the week before. At the beginning, we had like 20 issues or 25 issues that we could work on, ready to go in the backlog. Basically, data accuracy is, and stability is much improved. We have better foundation for our better statistical foundations for our methodology. And then, so apart from the initial research and planning, I think the biggest thing that we did is we came up with some quality metrics right at the beginning that we programmed into our code. Redundant, we put in our code. And then used that along the way to measure our progress. And that was really key to determining how good of a job we were doing. Coming up with alternative minimum, so AMM stands for alternative minimum mean or alternative maximum mean. It's basically the bounds that you can set on average earnings to tell whether it agrees or not with the percentile earnings. And that even though some of those are soft metrics, they were super valuable as we worked on it. Another nice thing is this was after all the new OES code, everything was rewritten. There's no legacy code in there, and that really paid off, because as soon as we basically finished work and integrated, everything downstream just worked, which for people on a data team, that probably makes it's more exciting for us on the data team. Those who don't know how bad our legacy code was probably don't have context for how cool that is. And then some side data sets are improved along the way. There were a few things that didn't go well. We had some brainstorming sessions for how to do nearest neighbor seeding for average earnings and percentile earnings. Basically trying to find where we didn't know, where we needed to estimate earnings data. Let's go find the closest data, like similar regions, similar occupations, similar industries, all those kind of things, and seed a value or estimated initial value using that. That is a really defensible way to do things, but it's not practical at all, given the complexity of the data. So we spent, I think Brian spent
Isn't that the only thing that I worked on in this whole process?
I think Brian spent 2 weeks, and then at the end of the 2 weeks, we said, let's reconsider what we're doing. So that was hard. Another problem with this, which it's nice to have done a lot of the project myself. Like I had a lot of ownership in it, but I really got burned out in the middle. When you work a year and a half on the same thing, it's hard to find motivation to keep going. So like even just spending this week thinking of, recapping, creating a slideshow for this is a really big deal for me because this is a year and a half of my life. I'm like getting teary-eyed. It's a big deal to me, but I think as a team, we could have done, I'm not blaming you guys, but I think I could have done better at communicating so that other people could work on it better. I just think we could have done better at that and prevented some burnout. We did, by the end, like I was saying, we were not figuring out what we were going to do the next week until the end of the previous week. That ended up in a lot of code rework. So we would end up writing code, and then the next week realizing the problems with the code, coming back to it, rewriting. I'm not sure how we could have solved that. I have to put more thought into that, but there was quite a bit of code rework that went on. There were also many times when something got merged before I had done a full test run. So I tested 2017 and 2016 and 2015 going backwards, and they all worked, so merge. And then 2008 fails, rats. But whenever we did do a full test run and it caught failures, that it just saved a lot of time. So there were times when we did that well, times when we didn't. I think, I don't know which we did more, but could have done better at that. And then Luke knows about this one. The 2018 OES data came out in the middle of this, and we were like, hey, we've rewritten all this code. That the update should be easy now. It's modern code. But OES is still OES. And they decided to change the industry dimension, the occupation dimension, and the MSA dimension on us. So what we estimated as a, I think, 3-point issue turned into a 13, which was exciting.
You've never had that happen.
Yeah.
Totally unfamiliar.
So a few things that we can take away from this as a data department, and then also maybe hopefully you guys can get something out of this too. Whenever you're working with data, the most important thing is knowing your data. Trying to, this first point, know that data, earnings is not employment. We did a lot of research at the beginning on the employment aspect of OES. When we got to the earnings, we didn't go back and reevaluate. We didn't, I mean, I did to a certain extent, but I think we could have done a lot more. Let's look at OES from the earnings perspective instead. I tried to treat things as if it was all employment, and lo and behold, earnings are not employment. It didn't work out too well. I learned to ask Jared often if I ran into problems. Then something I'm picking up more and more, and something I learned from the analyst team too, sitting on a couple of their retros. They have a tax for legacy code, issues working on legacy code, or I feel like there were other things you guys have taxes for. Basically, that means if you think it's going to take a 5, make it an 8 instead because it's OES. We learned to do that with OES. In the past, we've learned to do that with IO. Anything input-output related, we add points to. I think we've done that with legacy before, and then unsuppressions. If you're unsuppressing OES, you should probably do it twice. I think I've already talked about the others there. So then what's next? OES does have more data. They have earnings in industry by occupation earnings at the nation. We've never taken this into account, but it's something that we can look into more easily now that this has all been rewritten. They also have some experimental state level staffing patterns. So right now we take their national staffing patterns and regionalize them using their regional occupation data. But we could start by taking the national staffing patterns down to the state level using their experimental data set. So that's something we would like to look into. There are still some to-dos for improving the earning percentiles. So as customers are looking at things and finding weird things, I do have plans, or I guess I know of some ways we can probably improve things. And then there's some dimension standardization that we can improve. This last one actually is a serious thing. Everyone should talk to their local product owner and tell them to get this into the tool. And for two reasons. This is a huge investment from the engineering perspective that we don't want to go to waste. And also, it's hard to know how good the data is if no one's looking at it. So in order to get any reliable feedback from this, people need to be using the data. So really the next thing for the data team is for clients to start using it and for us to start getting feedback so we can make it better. Lastly, available documentation. The knowledge base has a document on OES strengths and weaknesses that's pretty high level. If you'd like to look at that, it covers a little bit of what I talked about today. We do have a comprehensive methodology review and documentation that is not accessible yet, but if you want to look at it, you can. Then Lindsay is also working on some internal client documentation and external documentation. It will be available soon. It'll probably go up on Confluence, I would guess. We are hoping to have that done this week, but it'll probably be next week sometime. That's my guess. Any questions? Yes.
What made you guys start down this path? If you knew it would probably be a really large project, what kind of, was it a client request? Or
We knew it was valuable. Lots and lots of clients ask for historical earnings, and it's really something that nobody does.
There were two specifically 2 years ago in January, a year and a half ago, whatever it was. This was 2 years ago. We had several LMI directors, state LMI directors here in the office, Idaho, Washington, I don't remember which states were represented, but and our occupational employment earnings were a kind of a big focal point of talking with them. And I think they were skeptical of our data coming in, and they kind of won them over, but they also raised some good points for improvement for us. And then at a similar time, Brookings was investigating how we did our staffing patterns in particular, and they actually had a guy on their team, or currently on the team, I don't know, who worked for the OES for a while. And so they were asking very penetrating questions about how we did staffing patterns and how they weren't actually historical. So that was another motivation for.
I think Justin also basically promised at a user conference that we would.
That was last August. That was less than a year ago. So we were well underway. Yeah, I promised historic earnings in 2019.
Rookies.
No, I wanted to be on record. Like I wanted to succeed or fail.
I know. I still love it.
And also, just for the record, I joined the data department in about 2009, and we wanted to do it back then, but we just never had the bandwidth because we knew it was the right thing to do. Yeah. So
what's also interesting is customers on a regular basis are actually doing this badly because I mean, the OES says you shouldn't do this, and they're like, well, we have to do something, so we're going to do it. I mean, I know of one customer, and I said, oh yeah, we're working on this, and they're like, oh yeah, I have to do that myself. I know it's terrible and it's probably wrong, but it's, you can't get it anywhere else. And it's like, okay, huh, interesting. But there are a number of customers out there that are just, they know it's not the right way to do it because they can't put a year's worth of research in to produce it, but they have to have something. And they're probably, well, we know they're doing it wrong.
or they're getting it from us. I've gotten requests before for historical occupation earnings, and they say, I'm sorry, we can't do it. Like, we don't have a time series. And they're like, well, couldn't you take older data runs and stitch them together? And I'm like, well, yes, but you don't want that, and here's why. And they're like, no, we do want that. So, so I have handed them the gun to shoot themselves.
Don't kill yourself. Let us
The
know.
danger. Yes.
Just a question on the data itself. Is there an adjustment in the wages then to put them all at current level at 2018?
No. Yeah. So 2005 wages will be in $2005. I think that's how we treat all of our data for the most part. All of our structure LMI data. Yeah.
When you guys started, like, how far out on this timeline did you actually have planned?
That's a good question. I think I think we had most of the national staffing planned out, and then probably the first few issues of the regional and occupation earnings. Just kind of, we had, we worked on it in kind of the same order as this workflow. We started with import processes, then created these expansion processes. I think we started with, there are actually 4 different import processes for different vintages of OES data. And then, so I think we researched those, the expansion processes, and maybe this QCW formatted, or QCW formatted like OES for seeds. I think we did all that. This multi-year seeding actually came after everything else. Yeah, so I think we had portions of both to start with, and then it became quickly obvious that we needed to just finish the national staffing first because it was kind of its own separate thing, and then we could move on to the rest.
So you said 2018 was a real bear to try and fit in there, kind of in the middle. What does that mean? Every time you update to the new OES, it's going to be a pretty big pain?
It always has been. I think this is the 3rd or 4th OES update that I've done. Yeah, 3rd, I think. It's always been a big problem. I think the thing that I learned is just because it's new code, we shouldn't expect it to be easier, because it's actually the data that's messy. It wasn't. I mean, our old code was pretty messy too, but it handled it just fine. So.
Did it actually handle it, or did it just not look at it closely enough?
That's actually
Insane.
But OES is only once a year, so
Yes.
fight it, but
Thank
once a
you,
year.
Lord. That would be cool if it was more frequent than that, but. Yes, Chris.
What do you, I mean, the first way it'll probably show up on our products is like extra columns, you know, what, 20 more columns on the 200 columns you can already get in the occupation table, right? But what is this going to disrupt our products? Like, are there things that we're doing for our customers now that we ought to do differently now that this is here? Does that make sense? Like think when JPA showed up,
Yeah.
we all these answers we were giving people around curriculum review or something like that were just not the best answers we could be giving them anymore.
How I've been viewing it, I don't know what, Justin, you can add to this if you want, but how I've been viewing it is basically a major improvement in what we already had. So it'll be largely not visible to clients, especially the staffing pattern changes. Like, we're still producing the exact same format that we've always done. The numbers are just better, more accurate. the earnings, there is new data available. It's basically a new data set. So yeah, the obvious one is add more columns to analyst. But I'm sure we could build some new reports around it. I haven't thought beyond that though.
It seems to me that basically how have occupations been, like the value that a specific occupation is driving for the amount that they're earning over time seems like a fairly immediate, obvious report. Like, what is happening with this occupation? Are they actually earning more or less? How is that changing?
I guess that's an answer, but what's a question? The
question
we
there
need
is-
to answer differently based on having this data, you know?
We get tons of questions about this all the time, and this changes it from you can't or you shouldn't to here you go.
Like what?
Can we have historical occupation earnings?
Oh.
It's a daily basis.
What-
of
what-
that,
What
and
question is the customer trying to answer with that historic earnings? Are they trying to just see change over time, or are they
change over
trying to?
time, do their own projections, really understand how wages are shifting in our economy, but this will give them some.
In theory, this is a central data point in our data because it's the intersection of supply and demand, right? If in an ideal economy, this would be the single most important number we could produce. In practice, its impacts will probably be less felt. I think the other major place we'll see it is, and I don't know what shape it will take, is the talent vertical has a lot of demand for understanding wages over time. I don't know why they're obsessed with the time dimension, because they're always hiring now, not 3 years ago. But it's this perpetual need for whatever reason. So I don't know what that will look like in the talent vertical, historic earnings specifically, but the hunger's there.
And for them, it's
I'm
the
not
same
sure
as
why.
same as supply. Like they like to see the last 5 years of supply to know if it's diminishing or right? It's
Is
be
the
there in 5 years or
demand
not.
tightening or expanding?
It's almost always a way of thinking what would happen next.
We're going to see a lot of projections done based on this data set. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So I think the next question is, should we be doing those projections ourselves?
Right.
Or should we just give it to people and let them blow their leg off?
Yes.
Once we have enough APT.
This is kind of tangential to the code aspect of this, but I assume our competitors use OES because OES is the occupation data source in the US. Do our competitors have historic employment or earnings in the time series?
I don't think so.
Does anybody have it? And
I've
if
never
not,
heard of
are we
anybody
getting
having
ready to make a huge splash with this, like it's from a marketing standpoint? 'Cause, like the occupation data is what's most valuable in terms, well, maybe arguably JPA, but those two things. And if we have this, and it puts us roughly 2 years ahead of everybody else.
more of them.
Yeah, I think I would like to make a splash with it, but to do that, it needs to be in the tools. Because our customers' interaction with the data is not with what we produce, it's with how it appears to the analyst.
Sure.
So we need to get it in the product so that the marketing splash has screenshots of the tool. For sure.
It's tough because Brookings would jump up and down when they saw this presentation. Most customers would be like, what is it? What does this mean for me?
Except that they're asking for historic earnings. So now
Well, I just don't think that's most customers.
Another thing that we learned.
CI will put out a marketing push.
I think CI customers are the most data savvy customers of them all, in particular.
Wage growth is
No, that's
pretty
Canadian Idol.
interesting across the board. Talent will be really interested in this because being able to have some idea of how salaries have been tracking both for retention and recruitment is huge.
Just look back at time and say, look, you passed this bill here and then the wages did this. I hate your party.
You can actually, using the 10th percentile earnings, you can track min wage changes pretty easily in the also, for general, let's see, I don't know if I use it anywhere. Historical is the right way to say it, not historic. Historic would be like, this earning is historic.
Yeah.
Historical means you have historical data. Time series. It took us. Today is historic. The data is historic.
Historical data.
Just like
Have you looked at any areas that we would expect to see? So, for example, Seattle or San Francisco programming wages. Are we seeing what we would expect from news articles?
I haven't looked at that specifically.
Yeah.
Who can we say you were wrong? What, yeah.
Who do we blame?
Yeah, I'm excited to see our blog post about this, where we actually use the data to do something.
Do we have like an account with Burning Glass? So we can look at their data and compare ours and be like, look how bad it is.
All right, anything else?
Anecdotally, since there's a lot of programmers here, there's at least 26 individual programs that are required to do this, at least 26. I just went through our list of programs that have the name OES in just the name, and some of them I'm pretty sure don't. So the low ball there is 26 individual programs.
And how many instances of those are we running at the same time in the closet?
We don't talk about
that. Proprietary information. All right. Thank you all.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.